8月2日金曜日、現在は夜の21時25分を回るところになります。本日はアメリカの雇用統計発表の日ということでですね、この後5分後ですね、21時30分からアメリカの雇用統計発表されます。現在のレートですけども、ユーロドルが 1.3206、ドル円が99円の87銭、ユーロ円が131円の89銭、同時ドルが 0.88 の93で推移しております。今回の雇用統計もですね、事前予想が出ておりまして、7月非農業部門雇用者数、事前予想プラスの18万5000人、失業率が 7.5% という事前予想が出ております。一応参考情報としてですね、今週発表されたアメリカの指標ですね、総じて全てすごく強かったっていうような印象にあるんですけども、まず ADP 全国雇用者数、こちらはプラスの18万人予想のところが、プラスの20万人でしたね。あと第2四半期の GDP 速報値も 1.0% 予想が 1.7% ということで、こちらも強い結果になってましたね。ISM の製造業指数も 55.4 ということで、これもかなり上振れしたかなという感じですかね。あと今回の雇用統計の数字には反映されないんですけども、週間の新規失業保険申請件数も 32.6 万件ということで、かなり減少してるなという数字になってまして、総じてちょっとアメリカの指標が全部強かったので、今回の本番の雇用統計に関してもですね、ちょっと、期待値というか、そういうものがすごくちょっと上がっているような状況になっているかと思いますので、逆にそんなに悪い数字出ないと思いますけども、逆に下手な数字が出るとですね、ちょっとドル円とか今また99円の90銭台まで入ってきてますけども、下手したら叩き売られる可能性もあるので、ちょっとその、今回はネガティブサプライズだけは注意したいかなという感じですかね。個人的にはそうですね、プラス20万ぐらいの数字が出てですね、ドル円は100円超えてどこまで上に伸ばせるかと、ユーロドルは、逆にちょっとこれは下がるかなと、全般的にドル買いの流れになるかなという感じでは一応見てはいるんですけども、事前予想がプラスの 18.5 万人なので、最悪でもプラス15万以上はないと、壮大にドル円とか売られるかもしれないっていうのがちょっとリスクとしてはありますね。
Well, I think that's a fair assessment, but you have to remember there's a lot of seasonal adjustment that goes on in July. We can expect to lose about 1.3 million jobs in education, prior to seasonal adjustment. You got a lot of teenagers coming out.
あと1分少々で指標の発表となりますので、ちょっと指標の発表を待ちたいと思います。
But the trend I think we've seen is relatively strong. I think a lot of investors are going to be looking at this numbers for what it implies for Fed policy going forward.
Right, for the September meeting. But more, you've got a lot of problems with the jobs data.
Well, I wouldn't say they're problems. I think there's a bit difficulty in sort of figuring it out.
Scott, I was asking Mort that question because Mort has for a long time talked about how the jobs numbers are not an accurate portrayal of the employment market.
Well, they are a partial portrayal. For example, if you include part-time jobs, if you take into account people who've given up looking for a job, then people who've left the labor force, the numbers really are worse than the 7.5 or 7.6% that is sort of the headline number. It's really closer to 14.5%, and that's a totally different kind of number to be thinking about, but yet that is a better reflection of the weakness of the job market than the headline number as far as I'm concerned. When you have millions and millions of people, the number is somewhere between 28 and 37 million people who are working part-time, many of whom would rather work work full-time, those jobs just aren't available. But they count as jobs in the unemployment numbers. So I think this is the kind of thing that you have to look through the numbers and find out what's really going on.
Right, and it's right, as you mentioned, more it's the quality of the jobs as well, and how much those wages are being paid to people who are going back into the workforce. Now, Peter Cook, our Washington correspondent, is down at the Labor Department. Peter?
162,000 jobs in the month of July, Betty, below expectations, but the unemployment rate drops to 7.4%. That's the lowest rate we've seen since December of 2008. There are revisions in this report that take a little bit of the luster off it as well. Plenty for the Fed to digest in this report, but perhaps more questions than answers. Again, 162,000 jobs last month created. The revisions to the prior 2 months not
結果出ましたね。非農業部門、雇用者数がプラスの16万2000人ですね。で、失業率が 7.4%、事前予想で失業率が 7.5% だったので、それよりは 0.1 ポイントほど改善しているんですけども、ちょっと非農業部門雇用者数が事前予想に届かなかったですね。プラス16万2000で、速報で今入っております。ちょっとそれを事前予想に届かなかったということで、ちょっとドル円が少し売られてますかね。99円の発表前90銭台ぐらいまでだったんですけども、現在99円の20銭というところで推移してますね。で、逆にユーロドルの方は、発表前より上げてますね。現在が 1.32 の66なので、ちょっと事前発表前とは逆の値動きになってますね。ドル買い、ドル売りの流れになってますね。ユーロドルは上がってドル円が下がってという、そういう値動きになっております。
Other services down 2,000. Government, Betty, not a big movement there. We had federal hiring basically remaining flat, down 2,000 or so, but most of that was postal workers. We had state hiring down 3,000, local up 6,000. And this is going to be important here. Average hourly earnings, 0.1% drop month over month, year over year, 1.9%. That is the first drop we've seen month over month, Betty, since October of 2012. Again, a report below economists' expectations in terms of the non-farm payroll number, and plenty of questions, Betty, for the Fed to consider.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, Peter, the average hourly earnings. That's going to be very key to determine where the jobs market goes next. Alex, the futures, we saw an initial drop, and now they're coming back up?
Well, it's been kind of a crazy 2 minutes, I have to say. So initially, futures fell, then they bounced back up, and now they fell again. So the S&P now falling into negative territory, just down, though, about 1 point. So it seems like traders taking this number relatively in stride. You can see right here sort of the dramatic shift that we saw right when the number came out. Now, we're also looking here at the Treasury market. However, it is a rush into safety. We do see the 10-year yield falling, which means there's more of a demand for these safety Treasury bonds. We have the yield now about 2.6%. They have been around their highest level in 2 years. In the currency markets, it's a very similar story. We saw this dollar stronger all morning, heading for a weekly gain, but now we're seeing a stronger euro, a stronger yen, sort of anything other than the dollar at this point. And in commodities, the story really here is gold, right around that $1,300 an ounce level. Had seen a big decline throughout the morning, and as you can see here, a big rise in the gold price on that safety trade when the numbers came out, Betty.
Okay, let me bring in Sarah. Dig deeper, Sarah, into these numbers for us.
So, Betty, clearly this is a disappointing number. The headline number coming in 162, below what economists were looking for at 185,000 jobs growth. It's not a total disaster. The trend is still in place, but it is a miss, and it is slightly disappointing. It is also the smallest gain in monthly jobs that we've seen in 4 months. Retail, as Peter Cook mentioned, was a bright spot. The other thing I was really paying close attention to were wages, average hourly earnings, and really nothing to write home about here. Not so much growth in terms of wages and average hourly earnings on a month-to-month basis. They actually declined, and there was a lot of hope that they would rise, as the Fed has been a little bit concerned lately about inflation. When it comes to changes in manufacturing payrolls, a lot of people were watching this as well because the president talks a lot about America's manufacturing renaissance. We did see 6,000 jobs added during the month, better than the prediction, also better than that negative number number that we saw the month before. The only other thing I want to point out to you, Betty, in terms of not so great news here for the economy is that we did see the prior month revised lower. So yes, the trend is somewhat in place, but you want to see closer to 200,000 jobs growth, especially the Federal Reserve, as it considers when to taper or scale back some of its stimulus.
That's right, and that's why I want to bring in now Scott Brown again. He's a chief economist at Raymond James, and Morton Zuckerman with Boston Properties. Everyone's staying with me on this. Scott, as Sarah mentioned, now you talk about Fed and tapering, whether or not this takes tapering in September a little bit off the table.
Well, I think what the Fed said earlier this week, the fact that growth has been relatively modest in the first half of the year, that there is some concern that inflation could be too low, some increase in mortgage rates, all those things suggest that tapering is probably likely to be delayed beyond September. But investors should remember, I mean, the asset purchase program was never meant to last forever. It was meant to be a temporary patch to really get some momentum going in the economy. And it does appear like maybe we need a little bit more in the short term. The Fed is still going to be providing accommodation even as it scales back the rate of purchases.
Right.
And more importantly, it's really relying on that emphasis on short-term interest rates remaining very, very low. That should continue to provide support for the economy. But I think for the stock market, we're kind of in this sweet spot where the economy is improving, but it's not improving so fast that the Fed really has to take away the punch bowl.
Well, and more, I mean, as you're managing your businesses, as you're looking out in the economy, do you hope that the Fed does not start to taper? Do you hope that Bernanke, who you admire, continues with the bond buying program?
Yes, I think it's absolutely essential. Look, what we've had the worst recession since the Great Depression, and we've had the weakest recovery that we've had of any of the recoveries since then. We've had a very, very low level of growth. You're averaging a growth in GDP of under 2% in 4 years, but you have to understand it's in the context of fiscal stimulus of over $1 trillion a year for the last 4 years on average, and a monetary stimulus that is unprecedented in our history, and yet we're still unable to grow the economy at the general rates at which the economy improves after a recession, which is generally over 4%. So we have something going on in the economy that we don't understand. To take away the stimulus to the extent that we get it from monetary policy now, I think would be a disaster. I just hope we don't get into a situation where some event causes confidence in the economy to really unravel, and then you could have a real drop.
Well, and this is what was worrying in this report, which I talked about, which was average hourly earnings. They went down month on month, as Peter talked about, down 0.1%. And more on that wage story, I want to play for you one comment that we got a few weeks ago from McDonald's CEO, who's been under pressure, him and other fast food giants, under pressure to increase wages from striking workers. They say they want the minimum wage raised to $15 an hour. Let me play for you what Don Thompson, the CEO, said.
I think we have legislators and many people that will determine whether or not, minimum wage should be raised. And every time, if minimum wage is raised, we have always been an above minimum wage employer. And we've always provided opportunity. For us at McDonald's, whatever legislations come, those will come. Our franchisees, our system will abide by any of those legislations. We're about providing opportunity.
So, Mort, you talk about people coming into the workforce and low-paying jobs. Do you think companies like McDonald's should increase their wages?
Look, I can't make a judgment on McDonald's wage policy. I just sort of look at it on a macroeconomic basis. And on that basis, of course, we would like wages to be higher because that would improve the income of the consumer, and there might be a stronger response in the consumer market, which is one of the things that has always taken this economy out of a recession. And we haven't seen that. The real issue is not so much the wages, although that is an issue. The real issue is the number of jobs. We should be creating over 300,000 jobs every month now in order to begin to turn around the economy. We're nowhere close to that, despite the fact we have this huge fiscal and monetary stimulus to the economy, and we still 4 years plus into the recession, we can't get the economy to grow at a reasonable rate.
And another problem that I just want to point out here that a lot of folks and economists are focused on here, Mort, is the length of unemployment. Those that are unemployed for a very long time, more than 27 weeks or more, that's staying the same at 4.2 million. That is 37% of the unemployed. Economists say if you want to really look for a recovery and not be concerned that this is more of a permanent trend, you need to see more traction in that. We had seen improvement in the past year, Betty, but that number is staying little changed again at 4.2 million.
And one of the great problems with that, when people have been unemployed for 6 months or longer, it's much more difficult for them to get a job. People look at them and say, well, maybe they've lost their skills or their skills are no longer relevant. That is a huge problem for a country where work is the most important definition of the lives of most families.
Well, yes, I mean, a career and having a job gives you a purpose, and it's also your way of living.
雇用統計発表50分経過しましたけども、7月のアメリカの雇用統計、非農業部門雇用者数が、プラスの16万2000人、で失業率が 7.4% という結果になっておりまして、そうですね、失業率は 0.1 ポイント改善したんですけども、非農業部門雇用者数がちょっと、事前予想に届かなかったということで、そうですね、発表前とは逆の動きになってますね。ドル売りの流れで、ドル円は99円の90銭ぐらいから今また99円の、07銭、06銭というところまで落ちてきてますね。逆にユーロの方は、また、1.32 フラットぐらいのところから今ちょうど80ポイントぐらい上げてるんですかね。発表前と逆に、ドル売りの流れに、なってますね。今ドル円が99円割って、98円台突入してますね。今週発表されたアメリカの指標が、総じて良かったっていうのもあったので、ちょっと期待感が強かったかなというような状況の中でちょっと弱い数字が出てしまったので、そうですね、ちょっとドル円とかは今週の上げ分をちょっと削り取るような感じの値動きに現在なってますね。そうですね、ちょっと事前の期待がやっぱり大きかった分ですね、失望売りみたいな形になってしまってますね。結果論なので、後から言うのは簡単なんですけども、やっぱり、ドル円だと100円ちょうどっていうのが相当これ重いなっていうのが、この値動きからも見て取れますかね。もう、今月はもう8月入ってますし、この後特にもう、8月中っていうのは、大きな材料っていうのはもうほとんど、ないですからね。そういう中でドル円がまた100円超えてどんどん上がっていくっていうのはちょっと考えづらいような状況なので、ちょっとそうですね、そういう意味ではちょっと残念な値動きに現在なってますね。ドル円が今98円の97銭で推移しております。
As we just found out moments ago, the country added 162,000 jobs in the month of July. That missed economists' estimates. The jobless rate, though, fell down to 7.4%. Our chief Washington correspondent, Peter Cook, stays with us. Markets reporter Alex Steele as well. Equity futures, by the way, a little bit in the red now. Chief economist at Raymond James, Scott Brown, staying with us as well. And Scott, earlier we talked about the Fed and the tapering program. But in the meantime, from now until we get to the next Fed meeting, what do you expect policymakers to say?
Well, I don't think they're going to say a whole lot. We do know that Fed policy moves are going to be data dependent. I think the Fed was caught a little off guard by the bond market's reaction to the tapering talk. From the Fed's point of view, it didn't really matter much whether the Fed begins to taper in September or December, yet the market reaction has been surprisingly erratic.
Yeah.
And so that is now a factor in future Fed policy decisions. I think the Fed has been very, very clear, but then I do this as a living. I'm used to reading what the Fed says and interpreting it. I don't think the markets are all that good at perceiving what the Fed says, no matter how clear the Fed is. But I think that's got to be a real important factor. The Fed has to figure out how to communicate to the markets that this tapering is going to be a natural process, that even if they slow the rate of purchases, they're still going to be adding accommodation.
Right. But to your point,
it can't
Scott,
last forever.
Right. To your point, I mean, investors, traders, they have to react, not only interpret, but react. And so, as you say, perhaps some of that reaction was ahead of what the Fed really wanted to see happen. Scott, thanks so much for joining us. Scott Brown, the chief economist at Raymond James, through this July report. Now, as we continue to focus on jobs, we look for where the growth is. Healthcare reform driving up demand for one profession. That is next on In the Loop.
Some said the US has lost its innovative power. We said America is lighting the way as the innovation nation. Singular insights, superior execution. That's the power of global connections. Bank of America Merrill Lynch. Voted top global research firm 2011-2012.
As we've been talking about, the jobs report out this morning showing employers added fewer workers than expected in July. But one sector of the labor market that's white hot right now is nursing. In particular, demand for nurse practitioners. And our look at where the jobs are, Bloomberg's Olivia Stearns is here with why the Affordable Care Act is fueling demand for them. Olivia?
Hi there, Betty. Well, you know, the U.S. is actually facing a critical shortage of primary care physicians. So general practitioners, your internists, your first point of call. And when the Affordable Care Act actually kicks in, there are going to be millions more Americans suddenly seeking out this kind of primary care because they finally have insurance. One potential solution, though, to plug this gap is to try to transfer some of the load to nurse practitioners. Currently, there are about 167,000 practicing in the U.S. That number, though, is set to grow to about 250,000 by 2025. To see what this was all about, I actually went over to meet one nurse practitioner for myself. There you see her. She is called Nurse Susan, but she does have a PhD. So you could also
雇用統計発表から20分、経過しましたけども、7月のアメリカ、雇用統計非農業部門雇用者数がプラスの 16.2 万人、7月の、失業率が 7.4%、ということでですね、失業率の方は 0.2% ですかね、改善してるんですけども、非農業部門雇用者数が、事前予想がプラスの 18.5 万人だったので、ちょっと、事前予想に届かなかったということで、ちょっと失望りが出てますかね。全般的にドル売りの流れになってるんですけども、ちょっとドル円がやっぱり発表前の高値から、約100ポイントぐらい落ちてるような状況ですね。あと非農業部門雇用者数ですけども、先月の数字がプラス 19.5 万人だったんですけども、これちょっと下方修正入ってて、プラスの 18.8 万人に下方修正されてますね。前月分の非農業部門雇用者数がプラスの 18.8 万人に、下方修正されているのも、合わせて発表になってますね。そこまで悪い数字ではないと思うんですけども、失業率も改善してますしね。ですがやっぱり、事前の期待がちょっと今回は大きかったかなという感じで、ちょっと失望売りみたいな流れになってますね。ちょっとドル円はこれはちょっと厳しい感じですね。今週正確には昨日ですけども、安値から反転して、日経平均の方も、今日も400円超上げて、来週に向けていい感じで終われるかななんていう感じだったんですけども、結局、今週上げた分をですね、今週というか昨日上げた分をちょっとこのままの流れだとですね、全戻ししかねないような流れになってるので、ちょっとドル円は嫌な感じになってきたかなというのが、正直なとこですかね。なかなかやっぱり100円より上っていうのが、重たいなっていうのが、正直な印象ではありますね。
Singular insights, superior execution. That's the power of global connections. Bank of America Merrill Lynch. Voted top global research firm 2011-2012.
Well, here's a question that can be answered only by opening up a cold one. Can one of the world's biggest brewers make an authentic craft beer? That's the subject of today's This versus That. This is Blue Moon, which Miller Coors advertises as an authentic craft beer. It is a Belgian-trained brewmaster, and it's been applauded for its taste, even by those beer drinkers who wouldn't be caught dead with other Miller Coors brews. A Miller. Well, that is the craft brew industry. Last year, its trade group published a blacklist of companies that didn't fit the definition of a craft brewer, and Miller Coors was on that list. One of those craft brewers said that companies like Miller Coors are trying to cash in without really being a handmade beer maker. What's our suggestion on In the Loop? Look, if you like the beer, just drink it. It's just beer, guys. All right, well, it's about 56 minutes after the hour, which means Bloomberg Television is on the markets. Markets are fluctuating as U.S. added fewer workers than anticipated in July, but unemployment rate, that stands at the lowest level since 2008, 7.4%. And let's look at two important names in the pre-market that are moving. Dell is up 4% despite the drama with Carl Icahn, as the committee says the firm is near a buyout. And the bank, RBS, is also moving ahead of the open after getting an upgrade from Shore Capital. We're on the markets again in 30 minutes. And coming up, we'll talk about the jobs report with the CEO of the world's largest bond fund, PIMCO's Mohamed El-Arian, and an exclusive interview with the CEO of AIG, Bob Ben-Moshe. AIG on a roll. It will pay a dividend for the first time in 5 years and buy back $1 billion in shares. We'll talk to Bob more about that. You're watching In the Loop live on Bloomberg Television, streaming on your phone, tablet, and Bloomberg.com.
Some said the US has lost its innovative power. We said America is lighting the way as the innovation nation. Singular insights, superior execution. That's the power of global connections. Bank of America Merrill Lynch. Voted top global research firm 2011-2012.
7月のアメリカ雇用統計ですけども、非農業部門雇用者数がプラスの 16.2 万人、失業率が 7.4% ということで、失業率は 0.2 ポイントほど改善してたんですけども、非農業部門雇用者数が事前予想の 18.5 万人には届かなかったということで、ちょっと失望りみたいな感じでドル円とかはなってますかね。発表前と逆の値動きになってまして、ドル売りの流れ、各通貨なってますね。ドル円は高値から、今ちょっと戻してきてますけども、まあそうですね、90ポイント、80ポイントぐらい下げてるんですかね。まあ、逆にユーロドルの方は70ポイントぐらい上げてるという状況なので、各通貨ともドル売りの流れにちょっとなってしまってますね。今回の雇用統計、今週発表されたアメリカの指標が総じて強いものが多かったので、発表前からすごい、期待感みたいなのがすごく醸成されてたような状況の中で、そんなにめちゃくちゃ悪いという数字ではないんですけども、まあ非農業部門雇用者数が、事前予想に届かなかったということでですね、ちょっと、結果見て売られるような、ちょっと流れになってますね。ドル円にとってちょっと残念な、結果で終わってますね。7月の雇用統計は非農業部門雇用者数がプラスの 16.2 万人、失業率が 7.4% という結果で終わっております。